Our meeting will come to order, consistent with our policy of starting on time. And say good morning to the committee meets today to consider the nomination of General Mark Milley to be chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And we thank you for being here today and are grateful for your decades of distinguished service to our nation. We also welcome your family and friends and invite you at the appropriate time to introduce those that you feel are appropriate. It's standard for the committee to ask certain questions. These are the required questions. We'll ask them fast, and if you would audibly respond to them, I would appreciate it very much. First, have you adhered to the applicable laws and regulations governing conflicts of interest?
Yes.
Do you agree, if confirmed, to appear and testify upon request before this committee?
Yes, Chairman.
Do you agree to provide documents, including copies of the electronic forms of communication in a timely manner when requested by a duly constituted committee, or to consult with the committee regarding the basis for any good faith delay or denial in providing such documents?
Yes.
Do you agree, when asked, to give your personal views, even if those are different from the administration?
Yes.
Will you ensure that your staff complies with deadlines established for requested communications, including questions for the record in hearings?
Yes.
Will you cooperate in providing witnesses and briefers in response to the congressional requests?
Yes.
Will those witnesses be protected from reprisal for their testimony or briefings?
Yes.
Have you assumed any duties or undertaken any actions which would appear to presume the outcome of the confirmation process?
No.
Very good. Well, this is, I've heard you say, and we've all said, I think individually in different forums, that we're in a threatened world. I believe is the most threatened we've ever been in before. Our main focus is counterterrorism, but today America's security challenges have grown to become more dangerous. The National Defense Strategy, which is this document that we have adopted for our guideline to be used, and we have adhered to it, is an excellent one. We're trying to maintain the integrity of that and to follow it closely. The National Defense Strategy makes it clear that strategic competition with China and Russia, not terrorism, is now our primary national security concern. China and Russia have passed us in key areas and are catching up with others. I will outline some of these areas. That's something that most Americans are not aware of, and it's one that we have to be aware of and have to communicate that to the public. And years of budget cuts have left our military in a crisis that will take some years to fix. General Milley, you have been nominated to be the principal military advisor to the President, the National Security Council, the Secretary of Defense, and to Congress. The chairman plays a unique and influential role in the U.S. national security policy, and so the chairman has an outsized impact on the state of civil military relations. Appropriate civil-military relations are essential for a healthy democracy. We look forward to your views on this critical subject. The committee believes that the 2018 National Defense Strategy and the recommendations made by the National Defense Strategy Commission provide a solid foundation for how to prioritize our modernization efforts and how to position our global force effectively. We need a chairman who can advise civilian leaders on an integrated strategic approach to a wide array of global threats and the trade-offs between our strategic priorities. For example, more U.S. troops in the Middle East might help stabilize the region, but at what cost to the U.S. interests in Europe and the Indo-Pacific region? How do we sustain focus on the most important theaters, not just the ones that are the most recently in the headlines? Our civilian leaders are going to have to decide the answers to these difficult questions, and the chairman's best military advice is critical input in those decisions. That's you. The committee looks forward to your views on balancing our global force posture and modernization efforts as the department continues to focus on competition with China and Russia. President Trump has supported the new national defense strategy with defense budgets that give our troops the resources they need. And the National Defense Authorization Act, which we just passed by this committee, with an overwhelming bipartisan support of 86-8 at the end of June, continues the positive trajectory. We're now prepared for readiness and restore our military advantage. But hard work remains. Most importantly, we need a budget agreement. The NDS and the $750 billion budget request will be useless without a budget agreement. I think we all understand that. It's not your problem, but it's your problem to advise us as to the significance of that. Senator Reid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me also join you in welcoming General Mark Milley this morning. Thank him for his outstanding service to the nation. Also, let me acknowledge your wife, Holly Ann, and your family for the tremendous service they've rendered to the United States. General Milley has a long and distinguished career as an Army officer, most recently serving as the 39th Chief of Staff of the United States Army, where he prioritized rebuilding readiness and transforming the Army's modernization process. General Milley's professionalism and commitment to duty served him well, and I commend him for his willingness to take on another critical assignment. General Milley, if confirmed, you will serve as the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff during a time of transition within the Department of Defense. Currently, the Department is in the midst of implementing the National Defense Strategy, or NDS, which will enable the U.S. to posture for competition with a near-peer competitor like China and Russia. This strategy requires new investments for high-end capabilities and new training for our troops. At the same time, the threat posed by violent extremist organizations is not diminishing, and Iran and North Korea remain extremely dangerous. In addition to these broad strategic challenges, the Department continues efforts to restore readiness while recruiting and retaining high-caliber individuals to serve in our armed services. As the Department has grappled with these challenges, it has also been hamstrung by the fact that there has not been a permanent Senate-confirmed Secretary of Defense for nearly 7 months. And during this time, 2 different political appointees have helmed the Department in an acting capacity. In addition, vacancies are pervasive, I should say, across the most senior level, particularly in the civilian positions. Steady leadership at the highest echelons of our military is a necessity now more than ever, but I'm concerned that the constant turnover of senior civilian leadership within the Department has created uncertainty and disarray, and as a result, it may have unintentionally created a situation that could weaken civilian control of the military within the Department. I first raised concerns about civilian-military relations in the context of Secretary Mattis's confirmation to be Secretary of Defense. Most recently, the National Defense Strategy Commission also raised significant concerns about the current state of civil-military relations and encouraged the Department to take action to ensure decision-making remains in the hands of civilian leaders. General Milley, this morning, I hope that you will provide us with your views on the current state of civilian-military relations within the Department, and if confirmed as Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, what actions you intend to take to ensure this relationship remains robust and strong. The role of the Chairman is to serve as the principal military advisor to the President and the Secretary of Defense. As I previously mentioned, if confirmed, you will serve as the Chairman at a time in which our country is facing multiple threats from abroad. It had been my hope that as the President became more accustomed to the gravity of the office, he would over time become more conscientious and thoughtful with his comments. Unfortunately, that has not been the case. Instead, our foreign policy continues to discount the value of long-time alliances and careens from one crisis to the next, oftentimes driven by the President's personality and an apparent affinity for world leaders who do not share our core American values such as liberty, due process, and freedom of the press. General Milley, if confirmed, I'm confident your deep understanding of the national security threats facing our nation will be an asset to the President, and hopefully the military advice you will provide him will alleviate the risk of miscalculation and unintended consequences. Furthermore, if you are confirmed, I expect that you will continue to make it a priority to keep this committee fully informed on policy decisions impacting our armed forces and changes to our military strategy to counter the risks posed by our adversaries. Thank you again, General Milley, for your willingness to serve our nation.
Thank you, Senator Reid. General Milley, we'd like to hear from you in your opening statement and any introductions you'd like to perform.
Thanks, Chairman Inhofe. Appreciate that. And Ranking Member Reed, thank you. And distinguished members of the committee, good morning, and thank you all for the opportunity to appear before you today. It's a distinct honor and privilege to be nominated as the 20th Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and I appreciate the time and support this committee provides to the men and women and the families of the total Joint Force. I'd like to thank the President of the United States for the trust and confidence he has placed in me, and if confirmed, I pledge to you and to the American people and to the President that I will always provide my best military advice to him, the Secretary of Defense, the National Security Council, and the Congress to ensure America's global national security interests are assured. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the extraordinary service of the current Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Joe Dunford, who's been a longtime friend of mine, and his wife, Ellen. Chairman Dunford has inspired the men and women of our armed forces and conducted themselves with utmost professionalism and honor. If confirmed, I intend to use General Dunford's example and steadfast approach as a personal example for me to follow. On a personal note, I'd also like to thank my wife, who's here to my left, Holly Ann, for her love and support during our 35 years of marriage, multiple moves, and so much time as a single mom. Without her, I would not be here today. She, along with our daughter, Mary Margaret, and our son, Peter, have given so much to this nation, and I am forever thankful for their love and support throughout my career. They, like so many military families, have demonstrated incredible resilience, service, and sacrifice, enabling the men and women in uniform to continue to serve and protect this great nation. I'm also eternally grateful for the example set by my mother and father, who are no longer with us, but the strength that they instilled in me will last a lifetime. During World War II, my mother served in a military hospital in the Navy in Seattle, Washington, tending to the medical needs of troops from the Pacific. And my father served with the 4th Marine Division in the Central Pacific, making the assault landings on Kwajalein, Saipan, Tinian, and Iwo Jima. The foundation of service and commitment they provided to me throughout my life will continue to be an inspiration for me in the years ahead. Chairman and Senators, as you are all aware and have observed, we're living in a period of great power competition within a very complex and dynamic security environment. My parents' greatest generation, they fought to establish an international order that has prevented great power war for over 7 decades, and it's currently under the most stress since the end of the Cold War. From East Asia to the Middle East to Eastern Europe, authoritarian actors are testing the limits of the international system and seeking regional dominance while challenging international norms and undermining U.S. interests. Our goal should be to sustain great power peace that has existed since World War II and deal firmly with all those who might challenge us. In addition, the fundamental character of war is changing rapidly. We have witnessed a shift from an industrial age approach to warfare to a new era characterized by high-speed information and disinformation, proliferation of precision weapons, and military operations in highly dense urban areas requiring increasingly dispersed and decentralized operations, all of which are going to demand unprecedented levels of initiative and agility from our forces. We must adapt faster, and if confirmed, I look forward to working with this committee to continue to accelerate the U.S. military's modernization. By having a lethal, ready, and modern force, the United States military will continue to be a vital element of national power to secure peace through strength. If confirmed, I will support our diplomatic efforts to counter destabilizing activities by revisionist powers, rogue regimes, and non-state actors, and I will ensure our joint force is prepared to respond if deterrence fails. Understanding that alliances and partnerships are critical to advancing our national security interests, and I will work tirelessly with my counterparts from like-minded nations to ensure our collective security responsibilities are met. In order to protect their freedoms, the American people entrust us with the nation's most valued resource, their sons and daughters. These young men and women are the best military in the world, and our adversaries should not test that proposition. In sum, if confirmed, my priorities are to provide best military advice, to maintain steady continuity of military leadership, implement the National Defense Strategy with emphasis on increasing the readiness and modernization of the joint force, maintain and grow our network of allies and partners, sustain great power peace in an era of great power competition, and provide unwavering support, care, and leadership to our troops and their families. And finally, I have a deep sense of personal humility and fully recognize the complexity of the United States military and the world security situation. And I know that I do not know all the answers. Therefore, I will be open to a wide variety of expert opinions in order to form my best military advice. In closing, if confirmed, it would be my honor to serve alongside these remarkable men and women as the 20th Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you, and I look forward to your questions.
Yeah. Thank you, General Milley. I think what we'll do, Senator Reid and I feel we can start with about 5-minute questions, and we're going to try to adhere to that time frame because we have a lot of interest here, as you can see by the presence of these people. I've got 3 things I want to make sure that we get out at the very beginning of this of the meeting. First of all, I wish the entire country could read this article from The Economist. I know you've seen it. We talked about it in the office. But in that article, it reports that China's military spending rose by 83% in real terms between 2009 and 2018. At the same time frame, between 2010 and 2015, our defense was actually cut just under 25%. Now, you stop and think about that. We had a similar experience a few years ago, but not to this extreme. We've seen the impact, if you have said before this committee, last March as recently, our military advantages has eroded. In some areas, China has passed us up. You know, when you talk to the American people, there's always this assumption that America has the very best of everything, and this is pretty much true back since World War II, but it's not true anymore. And we're pulling out of I call it a slump, but we have areas like hypersonics. Hypersonics, the modern thing that we're all in competition with, and there's some doubt as to whether or not we have come as far as both China and Russia. We look at the advanced cruise missiles. We look at some areas of our artificial intelligence, and our readiness has devastated just as well. When you became Chief of Staff, only 5% of the Army brigades were at the highest level of readiness. But now we've improved a lot. We're up to 50%. You might correct me if you think this is not accurate, but I think that is significant. But it shows that if we don't get a budget that will support the growth that we have experienced in fiscal years 18 and 19, it would be pretty devastating. So I'd like to start off with your sharing with us what would happen in your mind if we're not able to get a budget deal, if we had to go into a CR.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the impact would be significant. I think a CR is, in the words of the NDS Commission, they said the word reckless. I think a CR is a very significant negative impact on the training, manning, equipping, the readiness and modernization of the U.S. military.
You know, we have, and we've stressed this, and we're using our subcommittees, where they're all chaired by and with ranking members and chairmen, people with the, up here, people with the real interest in these areas. And I'd pointing out the areas that, when you look at the entire joint force across air, sea, land, cyber, and space domain, what current capabilities and emerging technologies are you most concerned about relative to China and Russia?
Well, candidly, I think the very number one for me and number one stated for the Department of Defense is the modernization, the recapitalization of the nation's nuclear triad. I think that's critical. Secondly, I would say is space. It's a new domain of military operations. We've got a considerable amount of both commercial and military capabilities in space. They need to be protected in all of the technologies that go with space. In addition to that, I would say that artificial intelligence and hypersonics, and there's many other technologies. Those two are at the top of my list for putting modernization investment.
Yeah, back up to the triad, because there are some with the idea that there's unnecessary redundance. Would you respond to that observation that some people have made?
Yeah, my view is that the triad has worked. I mean, there's many reasons why there hasn't been a great power war since 1945. Clearly, one of them is nuclear deterrence. And part of that is the capability of the triad. And each leg of the triad gives you a different capability. So you got the bombers, the missiles, and the subs. And the subs are going to give you assured second strike, and the missiles give you immediate reaction, and the bombers give you a manned, controlled delivery system. So all three present different problem sets to any adversary or enemy, and I think it's critically important to keep all three.
Agreed. Okay, the last thing I want to mention is we have a lot of vacancies right now. And in fact, you and I went over that from Secretary of Defense, Deputy Secretary of Defense, Chief Management Officers. The top 12 positions are vacant now. How much of a hardship is that going to place on you? And do you join most of us up here who feel we need to fill these positions?
I think it's very important to fill the nominated positions and get them through the system as quickly as we can, properly vetted and confirmed. But having a confirmed person in place, I think, clearly helps out us in uniform. And it also clearly delineates, you mentioned civilian control of military. I think it reinforces that because the civilian oversight is of critical importance, and they interface with Congress and other interagencies. So I think filling those positions is really important.
Thank you. Senator Reid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Again, thank you, General Milley, for your service and for your willingness to serve again. In your professional view, how would a military conflict with Iran impact the priorities outlined in the National Defense Strategy?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the first part of that.
Excuse me. In your professional view, how would a military conflict with Iran impact the priorities outlined in the National Defense Strategy?
Sure. Well, the priorities in the National Defense Strategy that is written, and that is an authoritative document for us within the Department of Defense to follow. It clearly states that China and Russia, great power competition, China and Russia are what we should be looking at in terms of training, manning, equipping, and preparing. But in addition to that, we have to deal with North Korea and Iran and violent extremists. But you mentioned a war with Iran. I don't know that that would happen, but if it did happen, it would obviously have a significant impact on the distribution of the force relative to those other priorities.
In effect, almost inevitably would overtake those priorities because of the many factors. One, the Americans in combat, which we owe significant support to, and also it seems the almost repetitious of the experience that we saw in Iraq, where our resources were so consumed with that fight that in many respects it gave the Russians and Chinese an opportunity to sort of start building up their forces. Is that a fairly accurate summary of what might happen?
That's a possible outcome, absolutely, yes, sir.
Since the withdrawal from the JCPOA, has Iran behaved in a more or less destabilizing manner?
Iran has behaved, they've always been a malign actor. Iranian terrorist organizations, terrorist supported organizations killed my soldiers when I was in Iraq. So they've been a malign actor for many, many years, not just since the withdrawal from the JCPOA. But their intensity of malign activity, I think, has increased since that event.
And General Dunford commented in public testimony that the withdrawal from JCPOA has damaged cooperation with our allies and complicated our ability to build a coalition necessary to counter Iranian malign behavior, which you point out spans many decades. Is that your view also?
I would align myself with General Dunford's view. That's correct.
And as I mentioned in my opening comments, there's an issue of civilian military control, which is perennial within the Department of Defense. As I indicated, as the Chairman indicated, these vacancies have left really some gaping holes in terms of just civilian presence in the Department. Presumption we will fill these quickly. We need the President to nominate qualified individuals, then we can fill them. But even after that situation takes place, there is the dynamic of making sure that civilian leadership are truly in charge of the Department of Defense. Can you give us your comments and thoughts about that, General Milley?
Well, from the perspective of the Chief of Staff of the Army, I did not, and I read the NDS Commission comment on that. I didn't see it in the Army. I think we had very firm civilian control of the military without question, and it's been a longstanding principle since George Washington at Newburgh, New York, established that many, many decades ago. So no issue in terms of civilian control of the military in a real sense of like we wouldn't do what we were told to do sort of thing. But in terms of the effectiveness and the efficiency of the department, it would be much better to have the nominees fully vetted and confirmed, because that gives us much more effectiveness in terms of dealing with our adversaries, our allies on the Hill, American people, and so on and so forth. So I'm very much in favor of getting them through the process and getting them confirmed.
Invariably, when we talk about any of the issues that confront us, the serious issues, we talk about a whole of government response, which reinforces the need, first, as you've just indicated, to fill vacancies in the Department of Defense, but also I will note that there seems to be a significant number of vacancies in the State Department and other areas which you work with on a day-to-day basis. And in addition to filling vacancies, there also has to be the appropriate allocation of responsibilities and cooperation. And with the deficiency of personnel on both sides, both state and other agencies and DOD, and with this, in some cases, a vacuum, if you will, of civilian leadership, do you think there has to be kind of a conscious realignment of responsibilities and appropriate roles?
I don't know if there needs to, I'd have to give that a considerable amount of thought to think if this needs to be roles and responsibilities realignment. But I do think that across the board in the interagency, it would help if we had a full-up bench of confirmed nominees. That would definitely help.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Senator Wicker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Milley, thank you for your service. I think you're the man for the job. You're signing on at a pivotal moment in the history of our country, and I appreciate you doing that. Let me refer back to the article from the June 29th issue of The Economist. And, Mr. Chairman, if it's all right, I'd like unanimous consent to insert into the record at this point the article that you mentioned too, called Army Dreamers, on page 36 and page 37. In addition to what the chair mentioned, General Milley, this article, in referring to the 83% increase in military spending in China, the article said, the splurge has enabled China to deploy precision missiles and anti-satellite weapons that challenge American supremacy in the Western Pacific. Do you agree with that statement?
I do.
So it's not an overstatement made by the press.
No, I don't think so. I think China has, for going on 30, 35 years now, have embarked upon what they refer to openly in the media in their speeches as the China dream, and that is to be at least a peer competitor, world-class military with the United States military by the mid-2030s.
Okay.
And they want to have the capability to defeat us by mid-century. So they're moving out on that in all the domains and all the different capabilities.
And indeed, the article says what you just said about mid-century. Right. And I want to commend the chairman and the ranking member for repeatedly emphasizing that we're guided by this national assessment and recommendations of the National Defense Strategy Commission. And let me quote to you from page 30 of that statement. The contrast between Chinese and American investments in technology and manufacturing is stark. Since the enactment of the BCA in 2011, the United States has lost roughly 17,000 prime defense vendors because of a lack of sufficient and predictable funding for defense. That's a correct statement, is it not, General?
I believe it is. I have faith in that report's data.
More broadly, an estimated 60,000 factories have closed as China's own national security innovation base has grown markedly. The cumulative result has been to significantly diminish the superiority in innovation manufacturing that has long been critical to America's military edge. So this is not some alarmist. This is a bunch of our top defense and national security strategists. And I'm, again, heartened by the fact that the chair and the ranking member are guided by this. We passed a National Defense Authorization Act, and we did so by 86-7. If we get through conference, send that to the President's desk, but don't pass a defense appropriation bill, what will be the effect of that, General Milley?
I believe it'll have very negative and significant effect, significant effect in terms of training, manning, equipping. I think you're going to have issues with procurement, new starts, and delays of acceleration of programs that are already there. I think your research development, science, technology, the modernization we're talking about to face the challenge of China in the future or any other country in the future, I think all of those will be negatively impacted unless we get the full budget passed.
All of those things stop in their tracks November the 1st because it's against the law.
That's right.
Now, if we say, let's have a 1-month CR, some people might feel that's just a continuation of level funding for a 30-day period so we can get things worked out. There's way more to it than that. Is that correct, General Milley?
There is more to it than that, and in addition to the tangible effects, things like training, manning, equipping, there's intangible effects, like the message it sends not only to adversaries and allies, but also to the soldiers and sailors, airmen, and Marines that are out there. Those are also negative impacts.
And when we then finally get an appropriation bill, and I certainly hope this doesn't happen. I hope we can be the governing bipartisan adults that we need to be. We get back to finally an appropriation bill. There's a cost to getting back to normal, isn't there?
That's correct. I mean, we're not going to dig ourselves out of a hole after 2 or 3 years of healthy budgets after 10 or 15 years of decline. So this has to be a sustained, predictable, adequate, and timely funding over time. And it's very difficult. It's very expensive. I recognize that. But the cost of not doing it is much more expensive.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, General Milley, to you and your family for being willing to consider taking on this difficult challenge at a time when there is so much going on in the world and the role of Chairman of the Joint Chiefs is so important. I want to just pick up on what Senator Wicker said, because I think the understanding that all of us have is that it's very important that we get a budget agreement. So I hope the message goes out to the leadership of the House and Senate and to the White House that we need a budget agreement, and that means compromising, and that everybody's got to give a little in order to do that. So I want to share the concern that Senator Wicker is raising. I also want to go back to the comments of both the chair and ranking member about the openings that currently exist within the Department of Defense. As you and I have discussed, that sends a very negative message to the men and women who are serving in our military, and a message to our adversaries about the commitment we have and about the opportunities that might exist for them given the vacancies within the Department of Defense. So I'm pleased to hear your commitment to doing everything you can to make sure that those vacancies are filled in as timely a fashion as possible. When you and I met in my office last month, one of the things that we discussed was the issue of ISIS detainees in Syria. This is something that I'm concerned about for 2 reasons. One, because, as you may remember, James Foley, who was murdered by ISIS terrorists who are suspected to be called the Beatles now. He was a constituent of mine, and so I have followed very closely what's gone on with these 2 detainees who are currently in Syria. But I think it's also a broader issue because we have hundreds and thousands of ISIS fighters who are being detained, many of them foreign fighters whose future is unclear, and it's not clear who's going to be responsible for detaining them and what happens to them and what potential threat they could pose to Europe, to the United States, and to the Middle East if they are released. One of the things that is included in the Senate-passed defense bill is an interagency ISIS detainee coordination position to help focus on the situation with detainees. If confirmed, will you commit to doing everything you can to ensure that this new position is properly resourced and that it gets the attention that this issue needs?
I will do that, and I do want to just take a moment. And James Foley was that was a horrible, brutal act and the people who did it were, many of them, held accountable. but that's not complete yet. But he is close to our heart. And yes, I will commit absolutely to make sure that that is fully resourced.
Well, thank you very much, General Milley, for your comments. I think one of the things that we have heard from the families loud and clear is that they would like to see those people responsible for the murders, not just of James Foley, but of Stephen Sotloff, Peter Kassig, and Caitlin Mueller, brought back to the United States, tried, and see justice for their loved ones. So I think one of the things that hopefully this coordinator position can do is to help make that happen. I want to switch to another topic. As you may be aware at this point, there have been no on-camera briefings at the Pentagon for more than 300 days. I think the American public is very supportive of our men and women in uniform. I think they believe in our military and in its mission, but I think they also need to better understand and know what's happening at the Pentagon. And to the extent that there is no opportunity to provide that information, to provide some transparency, the public is not able to get the information they need. So I don't know if you can tell us why it's been so long since we've had any on-camera briefings, but so I would ask you that first, and then ask you if you will do everything you can to try and ensure that there are regular opportunities for the public to engage and members of the press to engage with someone from the Pentagon who can answer questions for the public.
I don't know why, and I didn't even realize it was that many days, but I would commit to you that if I'm confirmed, I commit to transparency within the bounds of classification, and we'll do media on the record, off the record briefings, and so on. The American people have a right to know what the military is doing within the bounds of classification, and the media is the means by which they do that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Fisher?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, General Milley. Good to see you. I appreciated your statement that you gave in response to the committee's advanced policy questions, that you view nuclear modernization as the department's top modernization priority, as well as the support that you expressed for maintaining the triad, which you reiterated to the chairman today, and also pursuing supplemental capabilities, such as the low-yield ballistic missile warhead. Despite the significant amount of testimony that this committee has received on the need for the low-yield warhead, critics continue to assert that our current arsenal of low-yield options is sufficient, and this supplemental capability is not necessary. How would you respond to that argument?
The Department of Defense did a detailed NPR nuclear posture review, and in there, the recommendation put in the budget is the development of low-yield nuclear capabilities. I think it's an important capability to have in our arsenal in order to deal with any potential adversaries or contingency operations.
Thank you. Opponents of nuclear modernization often argue that when we go through this modernization process, it diverts resources away from other requirements, and that we cannot afford to modernize both our conventional forces and also our nuclear forces at the same time. I think this is a false choice, and that, as former Secretary Mattis put it, America can afford survival. Do you share those views?
110%, absolutely.
With Secretary Mattis?
Yes, we can afford survival, and we have to, it's imperative that we modernize and maintain the readiness and modernize both the conventional and the strategic forces, no question about it.
And in his last appearance before this committee, General Dunford and I discussed the argument that we can rely on non-nuclear capabilities in place of nuclear weapons without diminishing our ability to deter adversaries or to assure our allies, and he dismissed that idea. Do you agree with him that nuclear and non-nuclear capabilities are not comparable, and this notion of substituting one for the other is unwise?
They are absolutely not comparable. They are complementary but not comparable, and they can't substitute each other.
You and I have visited about some of the disasters that Nebraska has gone through recently due to flooding that we saw in March, also with blizzards in the western part of the state. Right now we're seeing more flooding in the central part of Nebraska as well. As you know, Offutt Air Force Base is in Nebraska, also Camp Ashland, is in Nebraska. That is a National Guard camp that serves as a training facility for the Guard throughout the country. We were able to come together to pass a disaster supplemental to begin the process of rebuilding. This did not cover, obviously, all the costs associated with repairing these facilities, and much still needs to be done. There's also damage to other facilities like Tyndall Air Force Base, also Camp Lejeune. This is going to be a long process to be able to get through and rebuild this military infrastructure. I would ask you, do I have your commitment that you will work with me so that we can continue this process of rebuilding these facilities in a timely manner?
Absolutely, and you and all of the senators in the various states that had impact of very severe weather conditions absolutely have my commitment to help rebuild those facilities.
I think we need to always keep that in mind. I appreciate your focus on that. Once we put things off, as I've learned in my time here in the Senate, you put it off and it deteriorates pretty quickly. We need to make a commitment. Thank you, General.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Dunford, thank you for your 39 years of service to our country and your willingness to continue in this very important position for which you are nominated. As part of my responsibilities, a member of all of the committees that I sit on, I ask all nominees the following two questions. Since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
No.
Have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement related to this kind of conduct?
No.
As chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, it is your role to be the principal military advisor to the President, assisting the President and the Secretary of Defense in providing for the strategic direction of the armed services. And as you know, this is a critical role with the turmoil that we are experiencing throughout the world. Under what conditions would you resign from your position if your advice and counsel on major policy issues were not being heeded?
I think it would be a function of something that was illegal, unethical, or immoral, and that's what I've been brought up with since I was second lieutenant, and that would probably be cause for resignation.
Illegal, unethical, or
Immoral.
immoral?
That's
Well,
pretty
illegal
much,
is relatively clear, but unethical or immoral,
those
that
are-
requires you to make some kind of a personal judgment as
Sure.
to how you can best serve.
absolutely.
So the sub-military conflict space known as the gray zone refers to the conceptual space in which countries take actions that lie somewhere on the continuum between warfare and peaceable relations. It is a space that Russia and China appreciate and exploit. How should the U.S. counteract Russian gray zone activities across the globe, and what capabilities does the U.S. need to effectively respond to these types of activities in the gray zone?
Yeah, the gray zone, the term gray zone, of course, is referring to asymmetric capabilities that are operating below the level of outright armed conflict. And that happens every single day, actually.
Yes.
And the capabilities that we're going to need to develop and maintain and sustain, many of which we already have, are cyber capabilities, our intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance capabilities, our information operations capabilities, and our special operations capabilities. There's many conventional capabilities in Navy, Air Force, Marines, Army, that are also useful in those capacities, but those are the principal ones that I would want to make sure that we sustain and invest in.
And are we putting enough resources into these tools?
I think in the proposed budget, it's balanced, but I would like to see more in terms of some of the higher technologies for the research and development and to set the conditions for the 2030s and beyond. Things like artificial intelligence, I think, will become critical in that particular area.
In January of 2019, the Supreme Court issued an order allowing DOD to implement this administration's policy prohibiting some transgender persons from joining the military, and this new DOD policy took effect on April 13, 2019. Are you implementing this policy?
We
And
are.
so how? How are you identifying those persons to whom this policy should apply?
Well, there's two categories. One is if they're in service, and the other is if they want to come in service at sessions. So first of all, it's not a ban because a person from civil society can try to come into the military and become a soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine. And when they enter into the process, they'll go through medical and physical exams, et cetera. If they identify as transgender, then they can apply for a waiver if they have gender dysphoria, which is a medical condition. And that waiver, like all the other medical waivers that we grant, will be evaluated by medical professionals to determine if they meet the standards to come in. And if you're in service, same thing. If you were in service and identified and had your gender markers changed prior to 12 April, then you've been grandfathered and you can continue to serve.
So basically, I mean, it is already hard enough to recruit people since so many of the young people do not, and some 75% of our young people don't even qualify to join any of our services. So I would think that one of the major concern will be whether they have they meet the medical standards and the criteria. Were it not for the fact that the president imposed this policy, would you be implementing such a policy?
I think that, in my view, we're standards-based military, as you point out, and we're concerned about the deployability and the effectiveness of any of the service members. And so if you meet the medical, the behavioral health, the conduct standards and the physical standards, et cetera, then it's my view that you should be welcomed in and allowed to.
So that sounds like a yes, because as long as there's nothing inherent in a person who is transgender that would prohibit this person from being able to serve in the military.
I don't believe there's
Right.
anything inherent in anyone's identity to prevent them from serving in the military. It's about standards, not an identity.
Thank you for that. I have some other questions that relate to sexual assault and what you're going to do to continue to address the scourge of sexual assault in the military and in our academies. And I just would like to have your commitment that you will continue to focus on what we need to do in this area.
It's an incredibly difficult and complex problem. You have 110% commitment, and I believe that the solution ultimately resides with commanders and commanders applying and enforcing good order and discipline standards and being held accountable to those.
Thank you.
Senator Cotton.
Thank you, General Milley. Thank you, Mrs. Milley, for your service to our nation. Let's continue along this line of questioning about standards for senior officers. You said you would be compelled to resign if you were asked to do something illegal, unethical, or immoral. That's consistent probably with the oath you took as a second lieutenant not to obey orders that were illegal, correct?
That's absolutely correct.
That's the standards we expect for every officer.
To stand, I
In
expect.
contrast to our enlisted, who do take an oath to obey orders of those appointed above them, unlike officers who we expect to have a higher standard.
Frankly, I would expect any soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, regardless of rank, not to obey an illegal, immoral, or unethical order, even at the risk of their own life.
That's different from a unwise or ill-advised order, correct?
Very much different than ill-advised. Absolutely. It's
So-
a Nuremberg standard. You can't hide behind, I was ordered to do it.
So what the President should expect from you, what the Secretary of Defense should expect to you, what the nation expects from you is you always give your best professional military judgment,
Correct, always.
and that you will then implement lawful orders even if you disagree with them personally or think they might be ill-advised.
Absolutely.
Is there any department in the government where that's more important that it be done?
I will render best military advice, and there's no department more important, I think, than the Department of Defense to execute orders if they're legal, moral, and ethical. And if the American people elected civilian control of the military will provide our advice, will provide course of action, we'll talk about risk and consequence and so on and so forth. When the decision maker makes a decision, it's our job to execute.
Probably a little more room for debate at the USDA than there is in the Department of Defense. Let's move back to what Senator Reid said earlier about Iran. He's worried about any kind of military action against Iran distracting from our peer competitors with Russia and China. And he compared that to the war in Iraq for the last 16 years, where we had, I think, at the height, 150,000 troops on the ground occupying that nation. Are you aware of anyone in the government who's recommending 150,000 troops in Iran?
I'd prefer not to discuss contingency operations in an open session, but no, I don't think anyone is seriously considering anything approaching what you just discussed.
And you said that theoretically any kind of military action against Iran, if, say, they struck a manned American aircraft or U.S. Navy ship or even impeded American shipping the way they tried to impede British shipping yesterday, could, in theory, distract. did the operations we conducted against Syria in 2017 or 2018 distract against our efforts in Russia and China?
I think it's always a question of balance and supply and demand and the amount of forces that you have and the distribution of those forces around the world relative to the priorities you've set. Specific to Syria, the numbers were relatively low in Syria. So, no, I don't think they had a significant negative impact for operations.
Or what about the kind of operation we conducted against Libya in 1986 for a terrorist bombing against American troops? Or that Ronald Reagan conducting against Iran for striking an American frigate? Operations on those scales, are they likely to distract against our efforts from Russia?
Those are very limited. Those were very limited single strike type operations, and those would not have significant impact on the main effort of China or Russia or the.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. And the suggestion that anyone is calling for 150,000 troops in Iran and that's going to distract from Russia and China is a straw man. Let's move to nuclear arms control. New START is going to be coming up on your tenure. Do you think it's wise to continue bilateral nuclear arms control agreements with Russia when China, in many ways, is a greater strategic threat than Russia is? Should China be involved in the next round of New START negotiations if we're going to extend New START?
As a general matter of principle, I'm in favor of arms control agreements or anything that lessens the threats and hazards of the international environment. But having said that, you have to have reliable partners to have any kind of arms control agreement. Specific to the New START agreement, that doesn't run out, I think, until 2021, 2022. And frankly, if I'm confirmed, I need to get with the State Department and the negotiators and the various people in the Department of Defense, et cetera, to make sure that I understand all the nuances of that particular agreement and to determine whether or not there should be a 5-year extension or not. So
thank you.
A little bit more study, and I'll have to get back to you on it.
I would simply add for the record as well to consider Russia's more than 10-to-1 advantage in non-strategic nuclear weapons being a part of the next round of those negotiations too. Thank you, General.
Senator Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and General Milley. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your service as well as for your family's shared commitment to service over many years. It's very much appreciated. General Milley, I'm the ranking member of the Emerging Threats and Capabilities Subcommittee, and earlier this week we held a hearing on Russia and China's expanding influence in Southcom, AOR. At the hearing, Southcom Commander Admiral Fowler stressed the importance of interagency collaboration with international development resources like USAID. It was clear in the hearing, as well as what we know generally, that poverty, corruption, and violence are among the leading drivers of migration that we see here in the Western Hemisphere, and also that these factors are also contributing to creating a space by which China and Russia can start engaging in influence operations in Latin America as well. My question for you, as the principal military advisor to the President, how would you recommend we utilize international development programs to strengthen U.S. security issues, particularly in the Western Hemisphere?
I think, and I've traveled many, many times throughout Central America and South America, et cetera, and regardless of region, I think the U.S. foreign assistance programs are important to achieve U.S. interests, but also to help nations establish some sense of stability within the confines of their country. Specific to the area you're talking about, these countries are plagued with significant poverty, significant violence, corruption, and so on and so forth. And that drives, in many ways, the push factors for people to immigrate that we see at the southwest border. So I think it is a security imperative, and I agree with Admiral Fowler that we probably need to do a little bit more with respect to some of the countries down there and help them in their internal security situation.
So the fact that the Trump administration has decided to cut foreign aid to the Northern Triangle countries is something that you would advise that he should reconsider?
Well, I have to take a look at the type of foreign aid and exactly what we're talking about specific to those countries and its effectiveness, its measures of effectiveness, and then make my recommendation to the President at that time.
General, in your opening comments, you stressed the importance of allies and how important that is to our national security. I am concerned about the current relationship that we have with many of our allies, and And that concern is, I think, warranted, given what we've seen from this administration. And I agree with you. I think we have to build strong coalitions in order to be strong. We can't go into activities alone. We're strong together. And any actions that we take in the Middle East, for example, to deter Iranian aggression, whether it's diplomatic or it's military, will require a strong coalition. And with Iran recently breaching the limits of its stockpile of uranium that was set by an international accord that you're very aware of, which the United States decided to abandon, and now that Iran is raising the enrichment level of some of its stockpiles above the purity required for civilian use, I think it's probably more imperative than ever that we have a united front and we work to do that. Given what has been happening in the Straits of Hormuz, I have a specific question for you, General. A recent New York Times article stated the current chairman, General Dunford, is proceeding with plans to assemble a coalition of nations aimed at deterring what he called Iranian threats to shipping in the Persian Gulf, which, of course, are very evident. Have you been participating in this process to build this coalition, and could you provide us an update on what's happening, and if confirmed, what would you do to strengthen those coalitions in the region?
I'm aware of the developments in the negotiations. I have not been a personal participant in those as the Chief of Staff of the Army, but I'm aware as a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. That primarily is being done by the Chairman and the Joint Staff, along with the State Department and the Department of Defense in coordination with Central Command.
I'd like to, in the remaining time here, hear some thoughts on how you would continue to prepare for multi-domain operations. Under your leadership, you authorized the development of MDO for the U.S. Army's multi-domain operations. I know the Army has stood up a multi-domain task force pilot program and will bring this forward. Could you share some lessons learned from your efforts of the Army and how you intend to incorporate some of that across all of the services, if confirmed?
I will. The multi-domain operations is really a concept at this point. It's not yet doctrine. I expect it to be doctrine within perhaps a year or two for the Army. And what it fundamentally is saying is that ground forces, air, naval forces, all of us are going to have to operate in what we think are now the 5 domains, the space, cyber, ground, air, and maritime, all at the same time, in order to achieve advantage over an enemy. And it's very, very complicated and very difficult and challenge for commanders to do that. So we're looking at both not only the doctrine, but the organization, the equipment that's going to be needed to operate in all those 5 domains of warfare. We've got an experimental unit called the Multi-Domain Task Force operating in the Pacific right now. We stood up another one that's going to operate in Europe. So these are experiments, prototypes, that we're trying to draw some lessons learned. Some of the key lessons learned we've got so far is the likelihood, the probability of much greater increase in dispersion and decentralized operations in the event of a war against a near-peer competitor. Another one is the vulnerability of the network, the communications, command and control communication network. We've got to do a lot more to make those more resilient. And there's many, many other lessons learned. I can give you a detailed briefing on that if you'd like it at a later time.
I'd look forward to that. Thank you, General.
Thank you. Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and General, congratulations, and thank you for your service and to your wife and family, and I also appreciate your acknowledgement of General Dunford's service. I agree with you on the exceptional job that he's done. You have big shoes to fill, but I certainly believe you're the officer to do so. I just wanted to comment very quickly. I wasn't going to do it, but my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have talked about these vacancies. I agree we need to fill the vacancies, but none of them have mentioned the unprecedented obstruction that they've undertaken under Senator Schumer's leadership to block and put 30 hours of debate on almost every Trump administration nominee. So let's do this. Let's get the vacancies filled, but let's quit the obstruction. I think that's a good way to work through this, but it's an issue that doesn't get enough attention. The issue that Chairman Inhofe also raised, which I think is an important one with regard to readiness, he mentioned 5% of the brigade combat teams, I think it was 3 out of 58, were at the highest level of readiness in 2015 when you took over. You've done an outstanding job of digging out of that hole by the Obama administration and sequestration when we cut defense spending by 25% from 2010 to 2015. General, I know you've read this book, This Kind of War, by T.R. Fehrenbach. Can you talk to me about just what you see as with regard to what was in this book, highlighting how thousands of American soldiers were killed and wounded in the summer of 1950 because of lack of readiness and training? And if confirmed, will you commit to this committee to make sure we never get near that level of a lack of readiness that killed so many of our soldiers that summer?
Thanks, Senator. That book is a wonderful book to read, and there's many others on the Korean War. And you may or may not know it, but General Dunford's father fought in the Korean War and is a Marine veteran of the Chosin Reservoir. And that first summer was a horrible experience. As we come out of World War II in 1945, and between 1945 and 1950, we went from the greatest military in the world of something like 8 to 10 million soldiers and 50,000 aircraft and so on and so forth, and then ripped ourselves apart in a very short period of time in 5 years, so that when the summer of 1950 comes around, we deployed forces, and of course the first force was an Army Force Task Force Smith, and it's tragic, it's horrific, from July all the way to December.
Lack of training, lack of funding.
Lack of funding, lack of readiness, equipment, ammunition, all of that stuff led to the deaths of tens of thousands of American soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. It should never happen again. It's been drilled into all of us since we were lieutenants, never to let that happen.
Well, I commend you for your focus on that, and ask you to make sure all your civilian and military counterparts have read this book when they come under your command. But I do want to get your commitment that with regard to training, there's sometimes pressure for you to reduce the levels of training, that you will commit to this committee to keep the highest standards of training for our military. Can I get your commitment on that, if confirmed? As you and I have discussed, there's two areas where I believe the Pentagon has not focused enough of its attention. Two key strategic areas are force posture in the Asia-Pacific and the strategic great power competition taking place in the Arctic. If confirmed, will you work with this committee? We have a provision in this year's NDAA to look at our force posture in the Asia-Pacific to make it fit with the great power competition, the national defense strategy, and the rise of China?
I will. If confirmed, I'll absolutely take a look at it. It's a critical region. Same thing with the Arctic, by the way. I think we need to really take a hard look at the Arctic as to what's happening.
Let me just talk about that for a minute. You know, there's almost daily headlines. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit this for the record. Just in the last 3 months, there's been several articles about the expanding Russian and China influence in the Arctic. Secretary Pompeo gave an excellent speech recently at the Arctic Council about the great power competition. Even as you and I just briefly talked about in today's Defense One, Admiral Fogo puts an article in that paper on the Arctic about the Russian buildup, ports, airfields, and yet a provision in this year's NDAA to simply have a port in the Arctic in America that could handle a destroyer, pretty simple, was opposed by the Pentagon. Can I get your commitment, if confirmed, to work with us to make sure we're not lacking from a strategic military perspective in the Arctic?
You have my commitment, Senator.
Let me ask one final question, General. By next year, Alaska is going to have over 100 fifth-generation fighters. This is in part because of what Billy Mitchell said many years ago when he was an Army general, that Alaska is the most strategic place in the world. Despite this buildup of 100 fifth-gen fighters, we have tanker fleets there that are over 50 years old. The Air Force is looking at their OCONUS deployment of KC-46s. If confirmed, will you work with this committee to look at what I think is a very obvious place to put new KC-46s, is in the place that's the most strategic place in the world with 100 fifth-gen fighters? That would be Eielson Air Force Base. Can I get your commitment to work with the committee on that?
If confirmed, I will definitely work with that and look at it and make my recommendations.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Senator King.
Upholding the legacy of Chairman McCain, I have to point out to the senator from Alaska that Billy Mitchell was court-martialed.
But I think it was rescinded later.
Also, in connection with the question of nominations, I've recently become aware that there are some 16 vacancies in the Department of Defense at senior levels that haven't been nominated. There's no obstruction of somebody that hasn't been nominated. The failure here in terms of the leadership of the Department of Defense is not with the Congress. We have to have nominated candidates, and as you know, we have a series of vacancies. I can understand your frustration on some other areas, but this isn't one of them where the Congress is causing any any slowdown in terms of the filling of these vacancies. General Milley, given the risks that you've articulated and that the National Defense Strategy articulates, I consider your job the second most important in the United States government, because we are living in a dangerous world. And your position as principal advisor to the President in a time of heightened international tension and risk is incredibly significant and important. You know what my question's going to be. What is it? Guess what my next question will be.
Probably the same one you asked me when I was nominated to be the chief. Are you going to be intimidated?
That's the question. What's the answer?
Absolutely not, by no one, ever. I'll give my best military advice. It'll be candid, it'll be honest, it'll be rigorous, it'll be thorough, and that's what I'll do every single time.
I believe that, but I think it's very important to emphasize the Oval Office is an intimidating place. The President of the United States is the most powerful leader in the free world. And to be able to be willing to say, Mr. President, you're wrong about this, or this is the consequences if it's something that he or she doesn't want to hear. It's just, there's no more important responsibility in your career that you will have had to make that statement. I have confidence that you will do that. You said to me 4 years ago, no one intimidates you, and I believe that, but I just want to refresh your recollection on that point.
Senator, and I would say it applies to General Dunford and most of us who've seen a lot of combat. We've buried these soldiers. Arlington is full of our comrades, and we understand absolutely full well the hazards of our chosen profession. And we know what this is about, and we are not going to be intimidated into making stupid decisions. We will give our best military advice regardless of consequences to ourselves.
Thank you, General. That's reassuring, and I have confidence that that's the case. Let's move to a more specific question about Afghanistan. I've been hearing for years on this committee, there was a debate about calendar-based withdrawal and conditions-based withdrawal. What conditions do you see that would justify withdrawal from Afghanistan? When do we call it enough is enough?
I think that the war in Afghanistan, at least American participation in the war in Afghanistan, comes to an end when our interests are met, and I think that'll be met through a negotiated settlement with the Taliban. And I think we're seeing some progress. I think some of that was reported just recently from Ambassador Khalilzad. So I think it is slow, it's painful, it's hard. I've spent a lot of my life in Afghanistan, but I also think it's necessary. We went to Afghanistan for a single purpose, to make sure it never again becomes a platform for a terrorist strike in the United States of America like 9/11. There hasn't been one, and we've been successful to date. It is hard, though, but I think the conditions at the end of the day will be a negotiated settlement with the Taliban.
Do you believe that the continued presence of American forces is a predicate to those successful negotiations?
Absolutely. I think it underwrites those.
So if we pulled out prematurely, it would undermine the possibility of a successful negotiation.
I think pulling out prematurely would be a strategic mistake.
Similar opinion in Iraq and Syria?
Different conditions, different situation. In Syria, we've been very successful and destroyed the geography of the caliphate, the physical entity of the caliphate, the proto-state. But the organization of ISIS, the ideology of ISIS, is not yet fully destroyed. There. So there's a modest amount of capability that needs to remain there. And the same thing with Iraq in order to maintain stability in Iraq.
General, thank you for your testimony. Thank you for your service. I don't think there's anyone that I have met in my work here that I have more confidence in the position that you're about to embark upon. Congratulations and thank you.
Thanks, Senator.
Senator Perdue.
General, thank you for being willing to do this, and thank you for your career. I'd like to go back to something the chairman mentioned right up front. You and I have talked about privately, both in this confirmation and in your prior one. General Mattis said that the greatest threat to national security is the federal debt. And you talk about that a consistent funding of the military and the dependence upon that could make a dramatic improvement, not only in readiness, but in moving to a new national defense strategy. Yet there are some who are talking about a one-year CR right now for next year. And it looks to me like there's several ramifications. I'd like to add a little more color to this. First of all, a one-year CR would delay the pay raise for our women and men that the President has asked for, and I think even the House proposal is considering. It would delay 1 full year the implementation of the new defense strategy, which would mean that next year we would be operating under a defense strategy that was developed 3 years ago by the prior administration. It would slow down and reverse a lot of the benefits that you guys have gained over the last 2 years in readiness. It would absolutely slow down for 1 full year a lot of the new programs that you've already approved and we've already approved for recapping and modernization that you just talked about. The thing we haven't talked about is rationalization. You guys have already found at least $4 billion of programs that you don't want to spend money on that a one-year CR would require you to spend on. Right. Would you add a little more color to exactly how draconian this is to the long-term effectiveness of our defense, and realize that last year was the first year in a decade that we have not asked the military to start the fiscal year under a continuing resolution. The supply chain got consistent. That has one contributor to how you guys have improved readiness over the last year or so. I'd love you to add a little more color to that for this committee.
Just briefly, Senator, the one-year CR, at least to my knowledge, has never actually been done.
That's true.
And so we're actually, I think, would be in uncharted territory if we went there. And CRs in general, I think, are a very ineffective and inefficient use of the taxpayers' dollars. And we're all supposed to be stewards of the taxpayers' dollars. We're keenly aware of that. But with CRs, what ends up happening is, at least my experience has been as a Chief of Staff of the Army, is the price points of products and services go up because you can't guarantee your cash flow to the industrial partner that you're working with, the commercial partner that you're working with. So I think CR in general, 1 year or 1 month, is a poor way to do business. Having said that, I think that the CR would have negative impact as in terms of training, manning, and equipping, procurement, modernization, spare parts, maintenance, end strength, pay and benefits, et cetera. I think those are the real tangible pieces, but there's an intangible as well, which is the message it sends to adversaries, allies, and most importantly, in my view, the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines of the Joint Force. I think it sends a terrible message to them.
Yes, sir. Over the long term, do you agree that China and their regional rebuilding of their military is probably the largest of the 5 main threats that we have facing the country going over the long term?
I think absolutely. I think China is the main challenge to the U.S. national security over the next 50 to 100 years. I think it's I think some historian in 2119 is going to look back at this century and write a book, and the central theme of the story is going to be the relationship between the United States and China.
Yes, sir. Do you think we can win the next arms race if it's mano a mano between the United States and China?
Well, I hope we don't have an arms race, Senator.
With regard to their Belt Road Initiative and their Made in China 2025, my experience with that part of the world, having lived over there, is that they generally, historically, don't tell their adversaries what they're going to do unless they've made a determination that they either don't have the wherewithal or the will to stop them. When they published Made in China 2025, do you interpret it that way?
I do, and they're using trade as leverage to achieve their national security interests, and the One Belt Road is a part of that.
Yes, sir.
It's part of a broader program.
Specifically, with regard to what they're doing with port investments around Africa and the Indian Ocean, but also in South America as well. There are over 50 port investments that they've made with proprietary loans. We now see in Colombo, Sri Lanka, and also Karachi in Pakistan, where they've actually foreclosed and are now militarizing those 2 ports. In addition to what they've done in Djibouti, what's your plan as chairman to address that sort of global expansion with regard to the PLA and their commercial interest as well?
I think China has expanded throughout all the regions of the globe, and they're in clear competition. They're primarily in competition for resources in order to build and improve their military and in order to fund and fuel their economy. I think that what we need to do is continue to uphold the norms of the international order that's been in place for the last 7 decades.
Yes, sir.
And where those are violated, stand up and be counted against it.
Well, you have my full support, sir. Thank you for being willing to do this. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Milley, thank you for your service to our nation and your families as well. It has been extraordinary over many, many years, and thanks for your conversation with me and my office recently. And I am going to proudly and strongly support your nomination, not only because of what you said, but what you've done throughout your extraordinary career. You identified the nuclear triad and space as two areas that require modernization, but I know that as an infantry leader, you have a deep concern about the families and servicemen and women who serve in our nation. They are our major resource, in my view, despite all the new forms of hardware and new bright, shiny objects that may be in space or on the battlefield. At the end of the day, it's people who matter most in our military. And so I want to ask you about military housing. Not glamorous, not sexy, but essential to the assurance that we recruit and we retain the best, because if we don't provide adequate housing to our military and adequate compensation and guarantee of retirement and educational benefits, we are going to be a lesser nation for it. As you know, the NDA includes some critical and comprehensive reforms to the military housing privatization initiative that will enhance accountability and oversight and prioritize families and ensure long-term quality assurance. These provisions, which were supported and advanced by many of us, require a tenant bill of rights to be developed. I'd like your commitment that you will aggressively and actively pursue these goals as you have done already in your present capacity.
You have absolutely my commitment, and I appreciate the support of the committee over the last year in this housing issue that came up. We're all in. These are our families, and we do have a commitment to make sure that they have the highest quality of life possible.
Thank you. You mentioned that the rules or the nature of warfare is changing, and certainly that includes an increased emphasis on cyber. You didn't mention it among the modernization priorities unless I misheard you, but wouldn't you agree that in cyber, the best defense is a good offense?
Cyber is one of the modernization priorities, and if I failed to mention it, that was my mistake. But absolutely, good offense is critical, and that is the best defense. But we also need to improve our network and the resilience and the defensive capabilities of the entire command, control, communication systems, not only of the military, by the way, but of the United States writ large and the infrastructure. I think those are key vulnerabilities to cyber attack by adversaries. But at the end of the day, we have to have those offensive capabilities too. And in the theory of deterrence, if they know that we have incredible offensive capability, then that should deter them from conducting attacks on us in cyber.
The New York Times recently reported that we have enhanced and stepped up our deterrent activities and efforts, making sure, in particular, that we can hold Russia accountable. There have been reports that Russian hackers have installed malware in critical United States electrical grid infrastructure and other potential sources of essential service. Can you confirm that we are stepping up and enhancing our offensive and deterrent capabilities in the area of cyber without going into any of the details?
Yeah, obviously, employment is a very, very high-level decision that would be very classified and so on. But yes, we are increasing and improving across the entire joint force. All of the services, Army, Navy, Marines, in the Air Force, we all have cyber organizations all within U.S. Cybercom. They're all component commands of that. And we are increasing our capabilities, our skills, our knowledge, our attributes within that system, all working under General Nakasone. So the short answer is yes, we are increasing our capabilities.
A number of us on this committee, including Chairman McCain, when he was with us, believe that we need more defined criteria for what constitutes an act of war in cyber, an act of war, because clearly Russia is attacking us, as are other nations like China, the question is, at what point do these activities, these attacks on the homeland and our essential services like utilities constitute an actual act of war? And I believe that the present kinds of rules fail to provide an adequate definition. I'm not going to ask you to respond in detail, but simply to request that you continue to examine this area and work with us.
I will do that. It's a great question. It requires a considerable amount of detailed thought from a lot of experts as to what constitutes an act of war with respect to cyber capabilities, and I commit to you that I'll get back to you on what my thoughts are.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Milley.
Let me interrupt for a moment. We're going to have 3 votes coming up, and it's our intention to go ahead and work through those votes to give everyone an opportunity to be heard. Senator Hawley.
General Milley, congratulations on your nomination and on your outstanding record of service. Congratulations to your family. I look forward to supporting your nomination. I enjoyed our conversation a week or so ago. We got to talk a lot about the National Defense Strategy. I'm going to ask you a few questions about the National Defense Strategy, and I'll just put my cards on the table and say why. And you and I talked a bit about this. My own view is that the political leadership of the country has, for a decade longer, not led us particularly well when it comes to our national security strategy, our foreign policy, that we've drifted. We've not had a clear strategy. We've not had clear priorities. That hasn't served the military well. It hasn't served our country well. The National Defense Strategy, National Security Strategy is a major step forward in actually defining priorities and helping us focus on what the major security threats are and then prioritize appropriately at DOD and get you the support that you need. So I want to ask you about some of those things. The department just recently released the Indo-Pacific Strategy Report, which builds on the NDS and says that the Indo-Pacific is the department's priority theater. You and I have talked about this. You agree with that and with this document's assessment that China and secondarily Russia should drive our force management and development decisions. Is that correct?
Absolutely. It's clear in the NDS, and I subscribe to that. It's a very, very worthwhile document. There are flaws in it, of course, but as a baseline document, it's excellent, and it's authoritative for us in terms of our force modernization and our force development programs. So yes, I do subscribe to that.
Very good. Let me just ask you a little bit more about that. According to the Indo-Pacific Strategy Report, the NDS requires DOD to posture ready, combat credible forces forward in order to convince adversaries that they cannot quickly, cheaply, or easily advance their aims through military force. I want to ask you, for the Indo-Pacific specifically, what would you say makes our forward forces combat credible?
First, it's the people, the talent, the knowledge, skills, and attributes of all of the people from the youngest soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, all the way up to the flag officers and Admiral Davis. And so I think that we have incredible people. There's about 370,000 or so troops of all kinds in the Indo-Pacific region. We've got order of magnitude, I think, around 2,000 aircraft, 200 ships, and so on and so forth. So we've got a significant amount of U.S. military capability, and most of that's west of the date line. So we have very, very good capability that can both deter and respond if deterrence fails.
Let me ask you about, in the event of a conflict in this theater, what do you think these forces should be able to achieve on their own while they await reinforcements?
Well, the first thing you'd want to do, and the NDS kind of spells all that out, but first deter. I mean, that's the first thing. But if deterrence were to fail, we want to blunt whatever offensive actions the enemy at that point would be conducting.
Let me ask you about conventionally armed ground-launched intermediate-range missiles. Do you think those would be helpful, the Indo-Pacific, for our forward forces to defend against a Chinese fait accompli, as the NDS puts it, the Taiwan scenario, for instance?
I do.
In similar vein, European Defense Initiative, EDI, has been instrumental, I think most folks agree, in making sure EUCOM has the resources it needs to posture itself to defeat Russian aggression. Former Secretary Mattis and some members of this committee have both called for an Indo-Pacific equivalent to EDI. We haven't seen a lot of progress on that front. Let me just get your views on that. Do you think that having a multi-year resource initiative, multi-year resourcing initiative like EDI for the Indo-Pacific would be useful, something worthwhile?
I think it would be useful, but it's like anything else when we're talking about money and resources. It's a balance, and to do the detailed analytical work, I'd have to get back to you on the specifics of that. But yes, it would be useful.
Finally, let me just ask you about pick up a line of questioning that Senator Cotton mentioned about the balance we have to strike in the different AORs. In your written response to a question of to what extent does achieving U.S. national security interests in the Middle East require a continuous U.S. military presence there, you referenced to the national security strategy, said that it directs the department to retain the necessary American military presence in the region to protect the United States and our allies from terrorist attack and preserve a favorable regional balance of power. Can you elaborate on that, and to the degree you're able to in this setting, tell us more about what you think it takes to do that sustainably while also adhering to NDS priorities?
Well, I think that there's a variety of capabilities that we have there now, and those go up and down depending on the situation at the moment in time. But in general, across the board, we are approaching our allies and partners in the region with train, advise, assist, enable, and provide various foreign military sales for equipment in order for them to secure themselves and to stabilize the situation within any of their countries. So that's the fundamental strategic approach to that. And in other cases, naval cases, for example, we're trying to put a coalition together right now, as we heard earlier, and General Dunford is on the lead for that, to try to escort commercial vessels and so on through the Persian Gulf. So it's different types of capabilities, but train, advise, assist, enable our local partners within the region to try to defend themselves and stabilize the situation.
Thank you very much, General Milley. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Duckworth and Senator Reed presiding.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, General Milley. It's good to see you again. When we sat down together, we had a good conversation about the importance of logistics to project and sustain our military power, and I'd like to touch on that here. How would you advise the President and the White House on what we need to do today to prepare for the fights of tomorrow, whether through funding policy or other prioritization shifts, especially when it comes to logistics?
Well, I think logistics, as we discussed in your office, and professionals, military, look at logistics as a long pole in the tent. And the ability for us to project forces overseas by Transcom, for example, the long sea and air lines of communication and keeping those open, to sustain both ground, air, and naval forces in a theater, in an active theater, all of that depends on logistics. The ability to move and shoot and communicate, all of that has got a logistics tilt to it. So it is a critical area of warfighting, and I want to believe that we pay close attention to it, which we do. And in terms of funding, things like airlift and sea lift capabilities oftentimes are overlooked because they're not the warfighting, the leading edge of the warfighting, but those are capabilities that we need to continue to invest in.
Thank you. We also, building on logistics, we discussed our concerns with great power competition, and some of my colleagues have talked about it here, but one of the things that we talked about was just the need to have an American presence in especially the Asia-Pacific region, not necessarily confronting China directly, but just being there and operating there on a local level so that our allies and partners in the region can refer to us, and we're just constantly there so that we're not leaving a vacuum for the Chinese to occupy solely. What more can we do to make sure our forces and our partners are treating the concerns of China's presence realistic, and to make sure that they are mature and ready for the continued friction with China? And with respect to our own presence overseas, can you give us an overview of how you might anticipate using or adjusting our military exercises, for example, so we get the most use out of them? You know, I'm talking about our strategic partners in South Korea, Japan, throughout Southeast Asia. When I was in Singapore for the Defense Summit just a couple months ago, one of the things that was very clear was that the nations in the region were very uncomfortable with China being there, but they needed an alternative, and they needed a greater presence of the U.S. to be there. Not necessarily confronting China directly, but just being in the region. Can you address this?
Well, my experience in Asia Pacific, and I was stationed in Korea and spent time in Hawaii and various exercises, plus travels as Chief of Staff of the Army, and I've got to know pretty much all of my counterparts that are leading the forces around there. And we have a very robust network in Asia of allies and partners, official allies with full-blown defense treaties, as well as partner nations. That's critical, and it's palpable when you go around the region as you have to see the anxiety and the fear that these countries have of an aggressive China. And they want the United States there. They want us there as a security partner. They want us there as a security guarantor. They want forward presence. They believe that we're a force of stability, and there's great concern. So our task, our key task, I think, is assurance. And some of the military dimensions of that, I think, would be to do exercises and ensure that we have interoperability with the various forces in all the domains throughout the area. And we do that. Indo-PACOM does that on a routine basis with a large suite and capability of exercises throughout the region that we continue to sustain.
Is there anything that you would change or enhance with those exercises in that particular dimension?
Well, as the Chief of Staff of the Army, we did a prototype of a multi-domain task force. I think grouping those exercises into multi-domain exercises would be worthwhile. One of the things we'd like to do, in I think it's 24 months, I think we're going to do it, is do emergency deployment readiness exercises to Asia Pacific and to Europe. And those are Army specific, but we could expand that into the joint force in the concept of the dynamic force employment, the DFE concept that is within the National Defense Strategy, so that we can project power on an emergency basis in an exercise and demonstrate that capability. I think that would have a very strong effect on any adversarial nation.
Thank you. I'd like to now just shift gears and talk about the parole in place program agreement that DOD had with DHS to not deport the members of the family members of our military men and women who are currently on deployment. Can you, how would you advise the President on the potential impacts of taking this action where the DHS is now saying they're going to resume deportation of family members of deployed service members? What would you say to the men and women in uniform who are facing this issue at home, especially when they're downrange?
Yeah, Senator, I'm not familiar with specifically what you're talking about. I've read a headline on it, I think, the other day. I would need to dig into exactly what DHS is saying and what they plan on doing. Our soldiers are defending our country, and their families deserve the protection of this country.
Thank you. And if you could follow up in writing, I would appreciate it.
I will do that.
Thank you.
On behalf of the chairman, let me recognize Senator Kramer.
Thank you, Senator Reed. And thank you, General Milley, for your service and for joining us, and congratulations on what I think will be a successful new job soon. There's been reference to important things such as, of course, China and Russia developing new weapons systems. There's been some discussion about the nuclear triad and its importance. So I want to drill down on just one of the three legs of the triad with you, if I could. The ground-based strategic deterrence has been the most controversial, I guess, of the three. Although I don't think there's a lot of controversy, but there's been some about its future. Of course, the Minuteman III missiles that the new system would replace are thought to be probably timing out sometime in the 2030 range. Some of the controversy that I refer to has to do with some thinking that maybe we should hold back a little bit on the GBSD, reconsider, reevaluate. The decision by the Air Force has been to move forward, a good decision, I believe. And I'm just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on the importance of sticking to that time frame of getting out the RFP, moving forward with the 600 or so new missiles in the GBSD, and why sticking with that time frame is important.
Well, the time frame, I think, it has to do with the aging fleet, if you will, not only of the missiles, but the bombers and the subs as well. So all pieces of the nuclear triad do need to be modernized and overhauled and updated, and they're reaching the end of their service life. And one thing that is really critical importance to the United States and the defense of the United States is to ensure that we have a reliable, safe, nuclear strategic response option for the President and other senior leaders to consider. And I think the ground-based strategic, the missiles, I think are critical to that. And we need to do it, and do it in accordance with the timeline that the Air Force has recommended.
Appreciate that, General Milley. Also, there's been reference to space. You, I think in your opening comments, even talked about the importance of the space domain. In response to that, the administration, as you know, has proposed a space force. The National Defense Authorization Act, as passed by both this committee and then, of course, the Senate, includes the posture of standing up a space force. A couple of the areas that I worked hard on regarding specifically the leadership, I'd like to get your comments on. And what I'm speaking to specifically is, after 1 year of the Space Force being established, we have that the commander would no longer have a dual status commander. That, in other words, there'd be a specific four-star just for the Space Force. That was pretty widely accepted. A little more controversial again, and this is why I want to get your comments on it. Would be we have language that after a year again, that the commander would answer directly to the Secretary of the Air Force rather than to the Chief of Staff, and then also after a year that that you'd have a permanent member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff rather than a situational member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. In other words, trying to model it as much as possible after the Marine-Navy relationship. Mm-hmm. And we did it in a way to have some incremental, movement, some transition to avoid a major bureaucracy. And I'd be interested in your thoughts and comments on that. Obviously, the job you're seeking will have a lot to say about that, and just be interested in your opinions.
Well, I would offer you this, is first of all, I think the incremental steps we're doing are appropriate and right. And I think the dual hatting of General Raymond for the next year is appropriate. And then as we go down and we learn our lessons, et cetera, and develop that and prototype it, and then we can split it off into a Space Force and a Space Command. So I think that's about right, and I think that's about the right approach, and I think having him as a member of the Joint Chiefs, I think, is also appropriate, and answering to the Secretary of the Air Force is appropriate. But having said all that, the broader, and we'll work through all the details of that, but the broader issue is the recognition, and I think this is critically important, and I applaud the Air Force for doing it, applaud the administration for doing it, and I think it's really important that we sustain it, is the recognition of space as a domain of military operations. There was a time when we wished it wouldn't be so, but it is. And our economy depends on space. Our military depends on space. And we've got to have the capabilities, both offense and defense, to operate in that domain and do it successfully. And a Space Force and a Space Combatant Command is the way to go, and we're moving in that direction pretty quickly.
Appreciate your answers. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of the Chairman, let me recognize Senator Manchin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it very much. General Milley, first of all, let me say thank you for your service and to your family's service to our great country. I appreciate it very much. I noticed in your answer to Senator Reid, you said that Iran has always been a maligned actor, which I absolutely agree with. And that was why I voted against the JCPOA, because I thought there could have been a much better deal to make them earn their way back into the world order rather than just giving it up front. And I don't think I need to ask you the question on your opinion on that, because if they've been a maligned actor, as I think they have been, I think we're on the same page as far as where they've been in their intentions, and we're not holding them responsible. My concern would be this, sir. I know the administration would hope to bring Iran and our allies back to the negotiating table. 2015 is different than what we are today in the geopolitical pushback we're getting. Do you believe that's a realistic or feasible approach to thinking we can get everybody back, allies and Iran back, and have a better outcome?
I don't know if it's realistic and feasible. We are in support of the Department of State in that regard, and that is the objective, to get them back to the negotiating table. And I'm hopeful that that'll happen as a result of the efforts that are ongoing.
And your thoughts on the sanctions?
I think the sanctions are an important part of that. I mean, as I mentioned, Iran is a malign actor, and I think it's important that we bring them back into the community of nations, and we establish diplomatic relations and in conduits of exchange, so that we can approach this from a diplomatic angle as opposed to a military angle.
Our relationship with our allies that we're going to depend on so much, the allies that we have, the NATO allies that we're depending on, especially what's happening in the area as far as with especially the UK?
I think our relationships with our allies relative to Iran, I think they're probably strained, but I think that they are, many of them are behind us in our relationships.
And you have good communications with all of our allies?
I do, yes.
That's great. We appreciate that. Let me just jump over to the Space Force. I have a concern. This will be the first major change that we've had since 1947 when the Air Force came into being. And the Air Force, as I understand, this whole Space Force thing that's coming together is being basically taken from from the bowels of the Air Force and a lot of the personnel. This is not something that we're starting over with new personnel and new training and all that. We're using with what we have.
That's correct.
I have a hard time understanding why we're putting a whole nother where you're going to have a person on Joint Chiefs. I mean, you're going to have a whole nother layer of bureaucracy within that that's going to be extremely costly, and I have never seen these agencies that didn't come with a tremendous amount of cost in personnel.
I don't know what the costs are. I know they've done some cost analysis on it, but I don't see it as another layer of bureaucracy. I see it as a group of people that are going to be dedicated and focused to the training, the manning, the equipping, the doctrinal development, and the protection, both offense and defense, of U.S. operations in space. And I think that having a force that is dedicated to do that, that is their sole mission in life, I think that is an important element.
Well, sir, here's the only thing I would say. My evaluation being armed services, I was on Intel before. We've seen what's happening in cyber and what's happening in space. Two of the things that have changed dramatically as far as where our defenses are going to be.
Sure.
Cyber, we thought at one time we would separate the cyber commands. Now we think that, hey, we're working much better as a unit together. Now we're thinking we're going to separate Space Force from the Air Force in a separate role. When to me it's all in one. That's the problem I'm having.
Well, it's all, as I understand it, it's all within the same department. It's the Department of the Air Force. But the Space Force will be a subordinate organization to the Department of the Air Force, similar to the way the Marine Corps and the Navy are as part of the Department of the Navy.
It's just that I know you're going to have your hands full with this, putting it together. I'm just hoping you have the flexibility to basically find the most effective avenue and vehicle for the Space Force to work. My problem is I didn't think it was broken. And if it's not broken, I don't think it needed to be fixed other than making more interest, knowing that there's much more activity in the space world, and it's going to be more. I didn't know why we had to separate it and move it out from within, and you say we're not going to, but yet you're going to have a role in the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I mean, you're going to have a whole nother seat at the table.
And I personally think that it's good. And I'm not taking the view that it's just added bureaucracy. I know that that is a risk and it's out there. But that's not what I see the outcome here. I see the outcome as a group of people that are dedicated to operations in space. And it's a complementary effort, not a duplicate effort.
Well, I'm just saying, in your new role, you're going to have oversight on everything. I hope that you will be able to look at that constructively and come back to us and let us know if you think it really needs to go in that direction, or basically we can strengthen from within.
And I'll do that.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Thank you. On behalf of the chairman, Senator McSally, please.
Thank you. Ranking Member Reed. General Milley, good to see you again. Congratulations and thanks for your service.
Thank you.
I want to start off on the issue of sexual assault in the military. I appreciate your work with me on this in the past, and in your new role, there's more to be done. As you know, since I've been in the Senate, Acting Secretary of Defense Shanahan and Chairman Dunford set up a task force very swiftly, working with me to add additional improvements to the investigation and judicial process while retaining the role of the commander. And we got 17 of 18 provisions from my bill in the NDAA, so that was a good start. But there's more that needs to be done in order to stop this fratricide from happening. So can I get your commitment in your new role that you'll continue to work with me on this? Would love to hear your perspective on what we need to be doing on the prevention side to stop this from happening, the impact on readiness, and the importance of the role of the commander.
Thanks, Senator, and I personally want to thank you for your efforts as a leader in this particular area. Sexual assault's unconscionable, it's a crime, and it is fratricide. It is a soldier-on-soldier, blue-on-blue sort of situation, and it has incredible second and third-order effects within an organization. It's a cancer within an organization, and we got to crush it. I personally think that the solution lies with the commanders and the further empowerment of commanders. And to the training of them in order to make sure that they understand the techniques of good order and discipline within their organization, and then hold them accountable where it fails. So I think the solution resides with the commanders, empowerment of the commanders, and holding them accountable. On the readiness piece that you mentioned, it's devastating on the readiness of especially small organizations, companies, and battalions. If there's a sexual assault in those organizations, that can bring an organization right to its knees. So we're with you on this. We want to be shoulder to shoulder and partner with you on it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Shifting gears to Iran, you may have seen the reports today that a British ship was blocked by Iranian, or was attempted to be blocked by Iranian ships in the Straits of Hormuz, but was stopped. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, or can you confirm that that actually happened? And also, Chairman Dunford yesterday shared that there is an effort to work with our allies for freedom of navigation mission in the Straits of Hormuz. Can you, again, just comment on what that mission might look like? And look, Iran's volatile, and we need to return to deterrence, and the military deterrent element of that is part of that changing their calculus. But we also need to, execute the national defense strategy. So can you just comment on your views on what's going on in the Straits of Hormuz with the Iranian mission, what it would take out of our forces, and how that might impact our larger priorities in the national defense strategy?
I saw the media reports and some limited reporting in other channels, but there was an attempt, it appears to be that there was an attempt by some small naval vessels to take over a commercial vessel from the British. The British had a military escort, so that took care of the situation. Having said that, the freedom of navigation is a fundamental principle and a norm for the international order that's been in place for now 7 decades, and we have a crucial role to enforce that norm. I think that what we're trying to do with the coalition to put that together in terms of providing military escort, naval escort, the commercial shipping may be an important factor, and I think that that'll be developing over the next couple of weeks.
Okay, great, thanks. Next thing I want to talk about is South Korea. I was over on the peninsula a little over a year ago. Very proud of our troops and their ability to fight tonight. Certainly, we've come a long way with a lot of innovations, under your leadership in the Army, to make sure that we can, again, deter any threats and be ready to go as part of the larger process to, move them in a different direction. But again, can you share your perspectives on what might need to happen on the South Korean peninsula, rotational versus permanent forces, exercises, in order to make sure that we're keeping our troops safe, Americans safe, and deterring any conflict there?
Well, as you know and as you saw, we've got soldiers that are very committed in all of the branches that are over there. We've got 28,500 soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines on the peninsula. They're in a high state of readiness. They're always in a high state of readiness. And they've been training. Battalion and below has not missed a beat whatsoever. We have cut back a little bit on the training of the command post exercises, the electronic simulation exercises, temporarily. But they're always in a high state of readiness. In terms of what we think will be needed in terms of rotational forces or permanently stationed forces. What we in the Army are doing is rotating the brigade combat team through, but the higher headquarters, the division, stays stable, and that's an enabler with all of its enablers. And I believe the Air Force and Navy are also rotating forces through, except for the higher headquarters at 8th Army and at the UNC Command.
Thanks, I appreciate it. Okay, the chairman's back, so I think I'm going to give the gavel back to him. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Take your time.
Yes, I had my Al Haig moment there, but thanks.
All right, let's do this. We can just go. No, have you voted the first one? Oh, you better do it. Yeah. Okay, appreciate it very much. Aha. Senator Kane, you're on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. General, congratulations on the nomination, and I'll just give you a shout out. I was at the Passage of Command service earlier today at the Marine Barracks as General Neller was passing the Commandant of the Marine Corps position, General Berger, and in General Neller's comments, he specifically singled you out, the service chiefs that he served with, as people that he really admired, and so I'll just pass that on to you. But then he looked at me and said, aren't you supposed to be in a hearing asking General Milley tough questions now? So not that they're tough. I want to talk to you about China. We talked when you and I were in the office together about the national defense strategy, but the comment that you made in response to one of my colleagues' questions earlier, that you think at sort of at the end of the century, when the history of the century is written, a lot of it is going to be about the U.S.-China relationship. Could you just elaborate on that a little bit?
I will, and I do want to. I obviously missed the passing of the colors there with the Marine Commandant, but General Nell is a great Marine, a great personal friend, and I know all of us in the Army are wishing him the best, and we're proud to have served with him. With respect to China, China is not an enemy. I want to make that clear. They are an adversary. I would say they're a competitor, but that's different than an enemy. An enemy in my language, in military language, means you're in an active armed conflict. You're at war. We're not there. We don't want to be there. We want peace, not war with China. But having said that, I think that the best way to do that is to make sure that we are prepared. China is, in fact, and it's not hype, it's not a red under every bed, it's none of that. China is improving their military very, very rapidly in space, air, cyber, maritime, land domains, et cetera. Their capabilities in doctrine and organization and so on are their technological development, their procurement. They're outspending us in research and development and procurement. You would never think that, but they are. So China is advancing very, very rapidly, and they have a national mission, a China dream, and they're very open about it, and they write about it in speeches and so on and so forth. So we need to make sure, we, the United States, need to make sure that we do not lose our advantages that we have relative to other countries, specifically relative to China.
And General Milley, as you talk about China as an adversary, I mean, with an adversary, sometimes you're cooperating, sometimes you're competing, sometimes you're confronting, sometimes you're challenging. There's no one-size-fits-all strategy. You point out that China is expanding in every domain, and that's not just in the military domain either. They're our principal economic competitor.
That's right.
They are competing with us in diplomacy, in trade, and at every domain in the military. Is it fair to say that China has learned a lot about the United States' military capacity from watching us fight the wars in the Middle East over the last 18 years?
China went to school on us. They watched us very closely in the first Gulf War, the second Gulf War. They watched our capabilities, and in many, many ways, they have mimicked those, and they have adopted many of the doctrines and the organizations, et cetera. In fact, former DepSecDef Wark, Bob Wark, he wrote a very good paper recently, which was called The Third Offset with Chinese Characteristics. It's worth taking a look at and seeing the broad dimension of how they have mimicked many of the things we're doing.
And it would be fair to say that if we were fighting another war in the Middle East, they would be going to school on us on that one too, right? They'd be watching what we were doing to continue to advance their capacities.
Sure. I mean, they watch us.
I worry, I ask that question because I worry about getting into unnecessary wars that could give China an advantage, both sort of a peace dividend, because they're not at war, but also the ability to learn on the United States. Let me talk about China and the U.S. and the U.S.'s allies. So as we set off against Russia, since the Truman administration, the formation of NATO and the growth of NATO has given us this constellation of allies that we've been able to use to set off against the Soviet Union and Russia. We don't have as sort of defined a network of allies. I was interested recently, I think it was Admiral Davidson a year or two ago, talked about the loose notion of a quad, U.S., Japan, Australia, India, in the Indo-PACOM. In March, I think, he gave a speech where he suggested maybe that was not such a maybe that wasn't the direction that we were pursuing, and then a few days later he said, well, no, we still have it as a notion. Talk a little bit about the Quad, but just generally about the allies that we would need in the Indo-PACOM to provide the same constellation of sort of support as we indeed compete with China.
Well, we from a military dimension, we require access and basing, et cetera, for forward deployed forces in order to execute our power projection capabilities. And we do have a robust network of allies and partners throughout the Asia-Pacific region. Our allies in Europe, that is a collective security arrangement, NATO, that you're very familiar with. There's not the same collective security arrangements, never has been, in Asia. Our allies in Asia are all bilateral agreements between the United States and specific countries like Japan or South Korea or Australia. So it is a different arrangement. It is not as robust an arrangement as you find in Europe. These are all legacies from the end of World War II. But I think the network of allies and partners in the Asia-Pacific region is critical to U.S. national security and furthering our interests in the region and in the globe.
Great. Thank you, General. I look forward to supporting your nomination. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And General Milley, let me add my voice to the chorus of thank yous to you and your family for your service and your willingness to continue that service in an incredibly important position. I'd like to follow up with a conversation you had with Senators Reid and Cotton just briefly about Iran. Would a nuclear-armed Iran require us to somehow adjust our strategic posture, and how would that affect our implementation of the NDS?
I think a nuclear-armed Iran would be a significant challenge and threat to the United States. So I think there would be adjustments. I don't know specifically what they would be, but there would be adjustments to the NDS.
So do you have any, as you're here today, would you have any opinion as to what efforts that the United States should be taking to prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear arms?
We're executing a maximum pressure campaign in order to prevent that and bring them back to the negotiating table in order to negotiate a better deal than what the Chickasaw was.
In your view, are those effective enough? Should we be doing more?
I think time will tell. Obviously, tension is higher, and we're going to see in the coming months how effective they are.
Thank you. We've had a lot of discussions here today about China. It seems like we have those discussions every time this committee meets, and appropriately so. And we know that the Chinese are seeking to expand and secure their influence in the region, among other things, by militarizing the islands in the South China Sea. Do you believe that our current freedom of navigation operations in the South China Sea are sufficient to prevent, for lack of a better term, a Chinese fait accompli of militarizing those islands?
Well, China has already militarized the South China Sea through those islands, and they already have capabilities, air and sea, and ground, to influence surface sea operations in the South China Sea. Having said that, I think our freedom of navigation operations are critical to ensure that the Asia-Pacific region, and specifically that area, remains free and open to commercial access, and that's the purpose of all those freedom of navigation operations that go on. Are they adequate? I think to date they have been. And I'll take a hard look at those to determine whether they're adequate as we go forward.
All right, so as we're here today, you don't know of anything else we could be doing that would better help those operations?
Help the freedom of navigation.
Yeah, just make them stronger.
I think, again, assuring the allies in the region that are in and around the South China Sea, like the Philippines and Vietnam and Cambodia, I think is important, and continuing interoperability exercises in that region.
All right. Mr. Chairman, that's, I think that I'll yield my time. General Milley, thank you again so much for your service, and I look forward to supporting your nomination.
Thank you, Senator.
All right. First of all, thank you very much for your patience. I'm sorry about being interrupted by 3 votes, but I think it was very productive. I appreciate your time and your service. And any further questions or comments you might have, Senator Reid? No, sir. All right. With that, we are adjourned.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Yeah. And we'll go vote.